In most histories of the Pacific War, grand fleets take center stage, carrier groups, heavy cruisers, island-hopping armadas. Lost in the shadows are the nameless, improvised craft that fought closer to shore, built from whatever lumber, metal, or hope was available. This story is about one such vessel, U.S Filipino patrol boat Marlin 6. A boat so small the Japanese Navy didn't even bother listing it on their operational threat reports. In early 1942, as Imperial Japanese forces surged across the Pacific, seizing territory with terrifying speed, most Allied naval resistance near the Philippines had been annihilated. Battleships smoldered in the bays. Destroyers were trapped without fuel. The airfields were gone. And yet, floating just outside a mangrove-lined channel on the island of Samar, a single patrol boat, barely 45 feet long, waited with its engines idling. Its wooden hull vibrated with every heartbeat of its underpowered diesel engines. The crew, 10 men in total, a mix of U.S. Navy reservists and Filipino volunteers, knew exactly what was coming. A Japanese landing force, 3 transports, 2 escort destroyers, and over 1,200 soldiers. And between them and the undefended fishing villages of Samar stood only this boat. The Japanese ignored it. That was their mistake. The Marlin 6 was never meant for war. She had been a customs inspection boat, fast enough to chase smugglers in peacetime, but hopelessly outclassed by any combat craft. Her hull was varnished wood, painted gray only after the war began. Her armament consisted of 1.50 cal Browning, bolted onto a reinforced deck box, 2.30 cal machine guns mounted on jury-rigged pintles, 4 homemade depth-charge canisters, improvised from fuel drums, 2 outdated Mark 8 torpedoes, so unreliable that even the crew joked they were for decoration. She could barely reach 19 knots, and that was downhill with calm seas and a prayer. To the Japanese, such a boat was a non-entity, not a threat, not even worth sinking. That is, until the day she became the only thing standing in the way of an invasion. The man in charge of Marlin 6 was Lieutenant Elias Harrington, a 32-year-old Navy reservist from Oregon. Before the war, he'd been a fisheries officer who spent more time cataloging salmon than firing weapons. His call sign, Hawk, came not from razor instincts, but from the way he squinted through his glasses. But Harrington had one gift that mattered now. He understood coastal waters better than most men understood dry land. He could read tides like a language, predict currents by the smell of the air, and navigate mangrove channels blind. When the war broke out, he refused evacuation and instead volunteered to stay behind with local forces. His hastily assembled crew included Chief Mate Ramon Alcaraz, a Filipino fisherman turned guerrilla fighter, Corporal Briggs, a Chicago mechanic who had never seen the ocean before, Sergeant Red Dalton, the trigger-happy .50 cal gunner, 5 Filipino militiamen, barely trained but fiercely loyal, Doc Villanueva, a schoolteacher serving as medic. None of them were supposed to face a destroyer, let alone an invasion fleet. Yet, on the night of February 22, 1942, that's exactly what was happening. Japanese forces were sweeping southward, securing islands crucial for supply lines. Samar, lightly defended and rich in resources, was a logical target. Radio intercepts warned of a landing force preparing to depart Cebu. Local fishermen brought word. A cloud of ships had been spotted on the western horizon. But every Allied vessel capable of intervention had been damaged or sunk. All except Marlin 6. At dusk, Harrington called his crew together. "We are the only boat left on this coast," he said quietly. "If they land here tonight, every village within 20 miles is gone by morning." Ramon Alcaraz stepped forward. "Then we stop them." The men nodded. No hesitation, no illusions, just determination. By 1900 hours, Marlin 6 slipped into the darkness. Around 2140, the lookout whispered, "Lights, bearing 310. Through the binoculars, shapes materialized. 3 large transports, their silhouettes towering over the sea. Behind them, 2 smaller, sharper outlines, destroyer escorts. Harrington's stomach tightened. "Mother of God," Red Dalton muttered, gripping the .50 cal. This wasn't a raiding group. This was a full-scale landing operation. The Japanese formation steamed confidently, lanterns glowing, engines humming loudly across the water. They did not zigzag. They did not post picket craft. Their escorts weren't even using searchlights. Why would they? To them, this coastline was defenseless. Harrington studied the map under a red lamp. There was only one chance. The channel leading to the village of Bailingtad was narrow and shallow, perfect for a surprise torpedo run. If he could cripple the lead transport inside the channel, the others would stall behind it, unable to maneuver. But he had only 2 torpedoes. Old, unreliable, slow-running torpedoes. Still, as he often said, poor odds are still odds. Harrington ordered engines to 1/3 power. The sea was calm, moonlight faint behind drifting clouds. Every vibration of the engine felt like a thunderclap. The Japanese ships grew larger, their hulls gliding through the water like dark mountains. "Range, 3,000 yards, whispered Alcaraz. Harrington steadied himself. "Hold course, sir. We're heading straight for a destroyer." "I know." At 1,500 yards, the Japanese ship began turning, its bow wave brightening. Harrington held his breath. But the destroyer wasn't turning at them. It was adjusting its patrol line, standard maneuvering. They still had no idea the patrol boat existed. "Another couple hundred yards," Harrington murmured. "Steady." The timing had to be perfect. Torpedoes this old didn't forgive miscalculations. At 900 yards, Harrington slammed his fist down. "Fire one." Briggs pulled the release lever. Everyone held their breath. A dull clunk echoed. Then the torpedo slid into the sea. "Fire two." The second torpedo splashed free. 2 streaks of compressed air bubbled across the dark water. The crew stared until their eyes watered. 20 seconds passed. Nothing. 30 seconds. 40. Dalton whispered, "Misfires." Harrington closed his eyes. Then, flash. A thunderous boom rolled across the sea. And then a second, louder. A plume of fire erupted from the transport's bow. "Direct hit," Alcaraz shouted. The lead transport shuddered, slowed, then began drifting sideways into the channel, exactly where Harrington wanted it. Panic erupted across the Japanese fleet. Searchlights snapped on. Sirens blared. Voices shouted through megaphones. And only now, finally, did they notice the tiny patrol boat fleeing into the darkness. "Full power," Harrington yelled. Marlin 6 surged forward, engines screaming. Behind them, the Japanese destroyers began their pursuit. Tracer fire ripped across the water, glowing lines whipping past the stern. The sea erupted in columns as shells struck dangerously close. "Brace!" Dalton yelled as a shell exploded off the port bow, spraying the deck with splinters. Harrington zigzagged wildly. Marlin 6 engines roared like wounded animals. But the destroyers were gaining. The patrol boat could make 18 knots, 19 if the wind was merciful. The destroyers could make 35. Alcaraz shouted, "Sir, they're closing fast." Harrington stared ahead. A jagged line of rocks jutted from the coastline. Dangerous, shallow, unpredictable. "Hold on," Harrington muttered. "We're taking the reef path." The men exchanged horrified looks. Only locals used that passage, and only at low tide, and only with boats that could afford to scrape the seabed. But the destroyers didn't know the route. "Starboard 10, Harrington ordered. Marlin 6 veered sharply, heading straight toward the reef. The Japanese destroyers hesitated, confused. Then, too late, they followed. The first destroyer struck a submerged rock with a thundering crack. Its bow lurched upward, metal tearing. The second destroyer swerved violently to avoid colliding with it. Harrington guided Marlin 6 through narrow channels between coral heads, scraping the hull but staying afloat. When they emerged into open water again, the destroyers were stuck behind the reef, unable to give chase. The crew let out a ragged cheer. But the battle wasn't over. The transports were still offloading landing craft. and they were heading for the villages. Harrington turned to his crew. "We're going back." Red Dalton stared at him. "Sir, we have no torpedoes." "Then we use what's left." The men didn't argue. Marlin 6 circle-backed through the mangroves, using darkness for concealment. Ahead, the Japanese landing craft were descending from the transports, open wooden boats with outboard motors, each carrying 30 soldiers. Alcaraz gripped the .30 cal. "They'll reach shore in 5 minutes. "Not if we hit them now," Harrington said. Marlin 6 burst from the mangroves like a ghost. Dalton opened up with the .50 cal immediately. The gun roared, flashing like lightning, tearing into the nearest landing craft. Wood splintered. Men tumbled into the water. Engines died. The landing boats scattered. 2 turned toward the patrol craft, machine guns rattling. Bullets hammered the wooden hull. Doc Villanueva pulled a wounded militiaman below deck. Harrington swung the boat around for another pass. "Depth charges ready?" he yelled. Briggs nodded, terrified but determined. "Drop 2." As Marlin 6 crossed directly ahead of a cluster of 3 Japanese landing boats, Briggs rolled 2 improvised depth charges off the stern. The drums sank silently for a moment, then erupted beneath the water. A column of sea spray shot skyward. The shockwave flipped all 3 landing crafts. Bodies and debris rained down. Dalton whooped. "That's what I'm talking about." But another cluster of landing craft was closing from starboard. "Ramon, take them," Harrington yelled. Alcaraz manned the .30 cal, firing controlled bursts. He struck the engine of one boat, sending it spinning helplessly. Another craft rammed toward Marlin 6, soldiers preparing to board. Dalton swung the .50 cal and unleashed a savage hail. The boarding craft disintegrated. Still, there were more landing boats, dozens. Harrington's voice hardened. "We cut through them. All ahead full." Marlin 6 plowed straight into the formation, guns screaming, spray flying. The crew fought with ferocity born of desperation. The sea became a maelstrom of fire, shattered wood, and bodies. One by one, the landing boats faltered. Engines shot out, hulls destroyed, crews thrown overboard. Within 10 minutes, the entire first wave was gone. The Japanese commander aboard the second transport, Captain Hiroshi Mori, watched the chaos with disbelief. A single, pathetic patrol boat was crippling his landing force. Unacceptable. He ordered the remaining landing boats deployed. More than 20 were lowered simultaneously. Harrington saw the huge wave approaching and realized what he had to do. "Bring us alongside the transport," he said. Red's eyes widened. "Sir, that's suicide. If we can hit their fuel drums, the whole deck goes up." Briggs swallowed hard. "Then let's do it." Marlin 6 raced directly toward the massive transport, weaving through scattered landing craft. Searchlights snapped on, bathing the patrol boat in harsh white light. Japanese machine guns opened fire from the transport's railings. Wooden splinters flew. A Filipino militiaman fell, mortally wounded. Alcaraz dragged him below deck as the medic rushed in. Harrington clenched his jaw. He felt every loss like a knife in his ribs. "Closer!" he shouted. Marlin 6 closed the distance until the towering hull of the transport filled the sky. "Dalton, aim for the fuel barrels." Dalton braced the .50 cal, lined up the shot, and prayed. He fired. The first burst tore into the ship's side but missed the barrels. The second burst sparked against the steel railings. Then the third hit something vital. A blinding orange fireball erupted across the deck. Men ran screaming. Flames raced along fuel lines. Secondary explosions shattered the ship's midsection. Harrington swung the boat away just as a flaming mast collapsed into the water. The transport was doomed. The remaining landing craft, now leaderless and terrified, began retreating. The invasion was collapsing. For the first time in hours, quiet settled over the sea. Smoke drifted across the dark water. Burning pieces of wood floated like candles. The crippled lead transport blocked the channel entirely. Its bow sunk deep into the shallows. The Japanese destroyers, still stuck behind the reef, could only watch helplessly from afar. Harrington leaned on the wheel, exhausted. Ramon Alcaraz stepped beside him. "Sir, we did it." Harrington looked at the men, bloodied, bruised, grieving the fallen, but alive. He whispered, "I think we did." By dawn, the surviving Japanese ships had withdrawn. Local guerrilla scouts combed the shorelines. Not a single landing boat had made it to the beach. The loss tally was staggering. 2 transports destroyed. 1,200 Japanese troops prevented from landing. More than 30 landing craft destroyed. 1 destroyer disabled by reef impact. Another forced to retreat. All caused by 1 wooden patrol boat with makeshift weapons. News spread across Samar like wildfire. Villagers emerged from hiding, touching the hull of Marlin 6 as if it were a sacred object. The men were embraced as heroes. When word reached the Japanese command, disbelief turned to embarrassment. A single local patrol craft had humiliated an entire landing force. Internal memos from the Imperial Navy soon emphasized, "Never underestimate local coastal craft. Always deploy picket boats. Escorts must verify shallow water routes. Landing operations require small craft patrols." Marlin 6 had reshaped Japanese naval doctrine, not through might but through audacity. Lieutenant Harrington received the Navy Cross. Ramon Alcaraz was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross by U.S. commanders and became a celebrated hero in Philippine resistance lore. Several crewmen earned Silver Stars. 3 received posthumous commendations. But Harrington never considered himself a hero. "We were just the last men left," he said. "Someone had to stand in the way." Marlin 6 was eventually scuttled to avoid capture. Her remains were swallowed by the sea and mangroves. But her story lived on, shared in whispers, told around fires, remembered by the families she saved. Historians debate the exact details: how many boats were destroyed, how many troops were on board, how far the destroyers had followed. But one truth remains untouched. A boat everyone ignored became the blade that cut down an invading force. Not through superior firepower, not through overwhelming strength, but through courage, improvisation, and the refusal to surrender. Military history loves its giants: fleet carriers, battleships, armored divisions. But sometimes war turns on something far smaller: a handful of men, a wooden boat, and a decision to face the impossible. Japan ignored the patrol boat Marlin 6 until the night it rewrote the fate of an island and proved that even the smallest vessels can carry the greatest courage.